What you are about to hear is a story that has never been told to the hunting public. This story is not sensationalized, it's not hyperbolic, it is just true and actual recounts from a person who is a former employee of one of the world's most recognizable animal rights organizations. Yes, that's what I said, an animal rights organization. And I'm going to introduce you to my new friend, John Bolin. And I did say new friend. And I think when you listen to this story, you are going to recognize that he is your friend as well. This is an amazing story about a man who dedicated his life to law enforcement, and upon retiring from his law enforcement career, he took a job with an animal rights organization. Unawares to some extent, but also because he thought he was on the side of justice and the right thing. John Bolin sat in executive meetings with the executive staff of an anti-hunting animal rights organization. And I know this story has never been told because John's never told it. And there has never been a person that has escaped the animal rights movement from the level that he was at and was able to talk about it. And you're going to hear about that. You're going to hear things about emails and plans and logistics and all, non-disclosure agreements and graft and corruption and downright dishonesty and lying and misrepresentation of the facts, all to push an agenda that is there for no other reason than to strip you of your freedoms. And John has come out after working for this organization and made it his life's mission to make the public aware, agricultural public, hunting public. He wants everyone to be aware of what is actually going on in the animal rights movement. And he's got emails, he's got documentation to back up every claim that he has. He's a law enforcement officer. This guy's a high-level investigator. He knows how to document facts. He knows how to preserve those for evidence and things like that. And he kept this stuff for his own protection. And now he is sharing his story and telling the dirty secrets behind the animal rights movement. And he wants to share that story with us. We as Houndsmen, the most vulnerable segment of the hunting community, because he wants us to know what we are up against. You are absolutely going to want to stick around and listen to this episode all the way to the end. He has got a great message for us as Houndsmen. This is a farm kid that grew up in Indiana. When I was at his house, he's got meat chickens. He was smoking fresh bacon and rib roast in a homemade smoker. This guy lives close to the land, I'm telling you, and he's well grounded. But his oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, his oath as a law enforcement officer, to serve and protect has no expiration date. And when he saw the corruption, he got out. And he is here to share his story with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Mr. John Bolin. Well, Houndsman XP fans, we have got a first for the Houndsman XP. I think it's probably going to be a first for the hunting community overall. And I'm with John Bolin. And the reason you need to know that name is because John is a guy that can talk to you about the animal rights movement at a level that has never been exposed to the hunting community. And John, I appreciate we're actually sitting at your home. You gave me a tour here, and want So welcome to the Houndsman XP podcast, John.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, man, you got an interesting story, and I think it's going to blow people's socks off when they actually hear.
No pressure or anything.
We'll just talk like we talked on the phone. It blew my socks off when I heard it. But we kind of share a real similar background. Mm-hmm. And former Indiana law enforcement officer. Just walk us through your law enforcement career.
I always like to say that I had a very rewarding career in law enforcement. I was blessed, really. I never thought about going into law enforcement when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. It was not something that I had ever even imagined. Mm-hmm. But that's the direction that my life went. And in 1989, I started my law enforcement career right out of high school.
Really?
Yeah.
What'd you do in the law enforcement community at 18 years old?
I was 19 when they hired me. Morgan County Sheriff's Department hired me.
So you got held back a year. You're kind of slow.
No, wait a minute. I didn't go right out of high school. Come on, I graduated in 1988, and then had a couple of little part-time jobs, but then ended up in the world of law enforcement. I went and applied at the Morgan County Sheriff's Department. At the time, they were at 110 West Washington Street in Martinsville, and it was the old brick jail that had been there since the 1800s, which I'm extremely blessed that I was hired in while they were still in that old building. The old jail building, it's a historic register building, and it's I think it's been converted into apartments, but they weren't allowed to do any like major alterations of the building, so it's still there.
So like people's apartments door crossbar it really is the crossbar hotel now.
There may be some. I haven't been in it since they did that, but I think there are still some of those obvious remnants of the jail, the bars.
Yeah.
But anyway, I started there in 1989. The sheriff at the time, his name was Charlie Beaver. I went in there and applied for a job as a part-time dispatcher and what they called back then, they called them turnkeys or jailers.
Yeah.
And I applied for the job, and he said, I'm going to give you a chance. I've never hired anybody under 21 years of age, but I'm going to give you a shot, give you an opportunity, and come to work. Mm-hmm. And I went to work there, and it was literally like Mayberry, because we had the dispatch center, and you and I understand this. We've seen the big modern dispatch centers, the 911 centers.
Right.
And a lot of your listeners have a visual of, I have to draw that distinction because they'll visualize the crime shows today in the big dispatch centers where all the everything's buzzing in there. Everybody's busy, the phones are ringing and all that. That's the modern day version. But then if you say Mayberry, then they get that picture immediately. And it really was a lot like that.
Yeah.
Because when I was dispatching, we had the mic that you had to push down on the bottom of the mic and transmit. And the window where I sat, it was literally like the size of a closet. And there was a plexiglass window that faced the front steps of the jail, the building, and the public could come straight in and talk to me through that plexiglass.
So you were a dispatcher and a receptionist.
Yeah. All of the above. And if there was somebody that sometimes, it depending on what shift you worked, if a deputy brought in or anybody brought in an inmate, you might have to tell the guys on the street to stand by unless it's an emergency, because you had to go back and book somebody in.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that way. And
Switzerland County was similar, similar. So people could actually just walk in, go right to the counter. There wasn't even a window, and so similar. Dispatch just sitting right there. They didn't even have an intercom and a buzzer for the front door until probably 1998.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just open to the public.
Yeah, you just walk in. You could have came in and broke anybody out.
Right.
That you wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Times have changed an awful lot since then. But there was some what I call the old school cops still there, guys that hired in pre-Tennessee versus Garner.
Oh, okay.
And we could get into that, more.
Yeah, this is a hound hunting podcast.
Yeah, so
we'll do a law enforcement training podcast here in a few minutes.
So anyway, that's the long version of my beginnings. And it sounds like somebody just pulled up in my driveway. I have no idea who that is, but I guess we'll see. And I worked there for 8 years at the sheriff's department. I worked my way up into a full-time position. They moved from the old jail into the new jail in, I believe it was 91 or 92. And I became full-time dispatcher. And then in 94, I was hired as a merit deputy. And went to the Law Enforcement Academy, Class 94, 117.
Yeah.
And I was at the Sheriff's Department, like I said, again, for 8 years. And I got out of law enforcement for a while. And, there wasn't enough money there to support my family. I had gotten married in 91, and we were having kids, and the bills couldn't get paid unless I was working 2 jobs. So I made a choice to get out of law enforcement and I went to work for the Chrysler foundry in Indianapolis. And I did that for 8 years. And it's important. I always make sure that I put this little tidbit into when I talk about my background in law enforcement, because it's, again, blessed and fortunate that all the doors opened for me at just the right time. But I worked at that foundry for 8 years, and they moved their operation to Tijuana, Mexico, and they offered us either a transfer or a buyout. And I took the buyout. I wasn't going to leave my roots, my home, Morgan County, Indiana.
Right.
And
let me describe Morgan County, Indiana, real quick.
Yeah.
For our listeners.
Yeah.
Morgan County, the county seat is Martinsville. It's 40 miles south of Indianapolis.
That's about right. Yeah.
And it is largely a agricultural wooded county. The Bean Blossom, the Bill Monroe Music Festival is right over at Bean Blossom, just south of Morgantown.
Yeah.
Is that in Brown County or?
It is. That's in Brown County.
So it's just right over in Brown County. But there's a rich heritage here of just agriculture, hunting, fishing. You've got the Morgan Monroe State Forest here. You've got, this is rural Midwest.
It really is. And you get what I like to describe to people that don't really know the geography of Indiana is the way that when you're up north on the lakes, it's flat land.
Right.
When you get south of Indianapolis, or as we always say, south of 40.
Right.
When you get south of that, it turns into rolling hills and hollers.
You bet.
And it's just like it's like Kentucky.
Yes.
It gets really hilly, and
they're a good salt of the earth. People live close to the land. Morgan County, Brown County, Monroe County used to be this way, but people. My whole family migrated here from Kentucky and settled in Brown County, and they brought those traditions with them and all the things that come with it. So it's rural Indiana. So you went to work at the foundry, and then you got a job with the state.
Well, I went to the city first.
Okay,
Martinsville City Police. I had lunch with a friend, and I said, the foundry closed. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm 35 years old, and the only thing I know how to do is police work and foundry work. And
right.
And he said, well, the city has a position. He said, they haven't filled. He said, you should go see if you can get a job here at the city police.
How old were you?
I was 35.
Which is a cutoff,
which
is a crucial age, because you can't get into retirement.
That's right.
The public employee retirement fund.
Yeah, you could work for a sheriff's department, I think, unless they've changed that. But
you still can't.
The city polices and the state level jobs, you couldn't be over 35.
Right.
And so I went and I talked to the chief of police, and Franz Hollanders. I knew him, and I knew the mayor, Shannon Buskirk. I had worked with those guys when I was at the sheriff's department, and when I left the sheriff's department, I left on good terms. I left and had burnt no bridges there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I'll give you a shot. He said, I'd like to hire you.
Right.
And so I was ecstatic about it, and a little bit nervous. It had been 8 years since I had been in law enforcement, and a lot had changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was driving down the highway after he told me he would hire me, and I'd already gone through the process, most of their process. And he called me, and you know how cops all tease everybody, not just cops, but anybody that's close that does the same things, the brotherhood, like your houndsman, the guys that hunt with hounds, I'm sure it's a very tight-knit brotherhood, and you're sitting around a fire and you're poking and prodding each other and harassing each other. Well, cops are the same way, as you know. So he called. I said, "Hey, Franz." He said, "How bad do you want this job?" And I just paused like that for a minute. And I started laughing. I said, "Okay, what is it? What you're calling to mess with me? Of course I want the job."
Mm-hmm.
And and he said, "Well, do you want it bad enough to go back through the entire academy?" And
really?
Yeah. And that's what I said. Just exactly the same expression you just had on your face. I was like on the phone with him in my car by myself, and I'm like, whatever. He said, "No, I'm dead serious, John." He said, "The Law Enforcement Training Board has just recently changed the rules for coming back into law enforcement." And he said, incrementally, if you were out 2 years, you'd have to go back and redo criminal law, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you're out 4 years, then if you're out 4 years or more, you have to go back through the entire academy. And I said, "Well, I've gone through it once. I need the job.
Right.
Let's go."
So you went back all the way through 13 weeks of Indiana law enforcement.
It was a shorter version this time. I forget how long it was now, to be honest with you. That was class 2005, 165 or something like that.
You got two different academy classes.
I'm on the wall at the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy twice.
See, I told you were slow.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the instructors, of course, I knew I was going to catch hell. I knew it. I'm sitting in the class up there, and one of the instructors says, "John Bolin." And I said, "Stand up, sir, yes, sir." He says, "Are you a glutton for punishment, or are you just that damn dumb?" I said, "All right, lay it on me, whatever." So anyway, I got through the academy again, second time, and was working for the city of Martinsville. And I caught wind of a job through a good friend of mine, said that the Indiana Gaming Commission is Mitch Daniels, governor at the time. They had, I think it was House Bill 1510, actually, if I recall. They had decided to create a brand new law enforcement, a new police department, and it was going to be under the umbrella of the Gaming Commission.
Because we had passed casino gambling in the state of Indiana.
Yep. The horse tracks were lobbying at the State House for land-based casinos on their property. They were losing revenue. Mm-hmm. And before that, Indiana only had what they called riverboat casinos.
Yeah, they had three.
Okay.
Two of them were right there. One was when they first started, you had the Grand Victoria, you had Argosy, and then you had one up on the Great Lakes. There were three, and then another riverboat, Belterra, came in Switzerland County, and then they put one in at Evansville.
Okay.
Isn't that right?
Okay. Well, it sounds like you know more about the history of that than I do.
Well, I was living with it. Yeah. I was right there with it.
Yeah, that's right.
And going through the whole thing. But
so part of that deal was, and I don't want to go on and on and on, but my background and how I ended up where I am now and what we're going to cover later is, I think it's important to understand how I got to where I was and how fortunate I was.
Yeah, so because your job with, we call it IGC, Indiana Gaming Commission.
Right.
Your job was to regulate all the casino gambling, but also investigate all of the illegal gambling and things. That falls under IGC's bailiwick.
It was IGC's, but the different departments within IGC, there was the folks that actually did the casino work. That wasn't my department. If we ever went onto a casino property, people were getting nervous because we were there to do an internal affairs investigation. We did the internal affairs there, but we didn't work or regulate the casinos. What we were doing was going out throughout the state looking at illegal gambling. We were looking at criminal enterprises that survived off of illegal gambling in the state of Indiana.
Yeah. And
part of that just so happened to be animal fighting. And the animal fighting there was a lot of gambling, illegal gambling associated
which is what
with that.
drew you to
that's right.
that arena.
That's what drew my boss, Larry Rollins, to that. We branched out from when we first started. When our department first was created, we went after the illegal slot machines in the bars and stuff like that. They were really not regulated whatsoever. They were really basically robbing people, taking advantage of people that would go in there and play those machines. There was no regulation at all. So guys would go in, they'd have a few beers on Friday night, and they'd spend their entire paycheck trying to win.
Try to win $10
on these machines. And then let me just wrap up my law enforcement career here. There was also a lot of criminal elements that went into the casinos. There had been a couple of cases of some fugitives that were had gone into some of the casinos, and the U.S. Marshals at the time, their warrants division ran by John Beeman, and I think he's still in charge of it there in Indy. They had been reaching out to the Gaming Commission quite a bit, to our department specifically, for footage and stuff, because there had a lot of guys that were wanted on warrants for the level that reached the seriousness where the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force would get involved. These guys liked that high-speed life, and they would go into the casinos and they would gamble and they would do different things in the casino, on the casino properties. And it was a good way that the marshals figured it was a good way to do some surveillance on some of these people. And even if it wasn't the fugitive, maybe their girlfriend worked at the casino, or they just started to get to where they really were using a lot of that information in tracking fugitives. And a good friend of mine he was on the Marshals Task Force, and he had mentioned that, you ought to, the Gaming Commission ought to put somebody on the task force, just full time on the Marshals Task Force, because there's so much of that that crossover. And so they called my boss and they said, would you have someone that you could task to us? And he said, yeah, I've got just the guy. And I was, again, lucky, extremely lucky. I was sworn in as a special deputy U.S. Marshal, and I was assigned to the Marshals Fugitive Task Force. And I began tracking fugitives with them undercover. And, without going into any kind of great detail, all of the tools that were available to a federal law enforcement agency were available to me. And I had a Department of Justice security clearance, Department of Justice, and got into a lot of exciting things there. And I wrapped up my law enforcement career doing those things.
Right.
From sitting on the porch of 110 West Washington Street late at night, hearing that radio crackle behind my head, to hunting fugitives and testifying in murder trials, and then sitting on federal wiretaps and listening to federal wiretaps and hunting fugitives all across the state of Indiana. And I had a hell of a law enforcement career.
Yeah,
I did, and I couldn't imagine that there would be anything else I would want to do.
So we got to fast forward a little bit. We got the backstory.
Yep.
You're investigating all sorts of things, hunting fugitives. You know, but then here's the big bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the one that the reason you and I are sitting down and talking together more than anything else. It wasn't just to swap old cop stories and stuff like that. We could do several podcasts on that.
Yeah, we could.
But tell us what you did once you wrapped up that law enforcement career.
Well,
this is the bomb.
This is the thing that really has catapulted me into a place over the past 4 years that I'd never dreamed in my wildest dreams I would be. But going back to the Gaming Commission and the animal fighting that I mentioned, the first case that we were involved in with animal fighting was because the Humane Society of the United States, HSUS, had contacted my boss and said, hey, we've got a guy that's involved in animal fighting, and would you be interested in investigating him based on the gambling part?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that my department, my boss, any of us we didn't have any kind of knowledge about animal fighting, no background there for me whatsoever. And it was something that I was going to be immersed in on the run. I mean, I was immersed in that world investigating the gambling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the gambling part really, and this is something I don't know that I've ever mentioned, but I'm going to mention it here because I think it's very important, and it'll lend validity to the bigger picture. We never really made a gambling case off of any of these animal fighting cases in the state of Indiana.
Really?
There was never a gambling case made.
There weren't charges
Nope.
charges filed?
Not for gambling.
Did you have the case made?
The case was made, and it was a great case under the animal fighting statutes.
Did you have the elements of the crime to prove gambling, and the prosecutor chose not to file?
There was very, very seldom. In fact, I don't recall one case that I worked, and I was the animal fighting guy.
Mm-hmm.
I was the guy. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that I fell into that, and I became proficient at it.
You were a subject matter expert within your agency.
Yep, I was. And so we got away from that case. That first case went all the way to the appellate court level in the state of Indiana. And it was upheld. We won the case ultimately, even at the appellate court level. This guy was raising and transporting fighting animals outside of the country. It was a big case. It was an international case. But what happened was we got to court at the state level, not the appellate court level, but at the prosecution level in Shelby County is where it was. And it was discovered at that time that the individual that had started this entire case from the HSUS, it was brought out during this trial by the defense that this guy had ties to the Animal Liberation Front, ALF.
ALF.
Which is listed as a domestic terrorist organization by the FBI.
Yes.
Has been for years and years and years.
Along with the Environmental Liberation Front.
That's right. ELF and ALF.
ELF and ALF are both domestic terrorist groups.
Yep, they are. Well, this guy, his name's John Goodwin. He went by J.P. Goodwin. He still works for HSUS, by the way. John Goodwin, basically that was an embarrassment for us, for the department. It was an embarrassment that we didn't know that. We're the investigators. We're the law enforcement agency. We didn't even do any kind of vetting of him.
Mm-hmm.
We just took his word. He's the animal guy. Mm-hmm. This is a Humane Society of the United States out of D.C., for God's sakes. I mean, they must be the experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take his word for it. I developed my own case. Obviously, I wasn't going to try to create probable cause based off what he or anyone else told me, regardless of who he was or whether I knew him or what level I knew him. I still made my own case. I did an undercover investigation at this operation, and I talked to the guy, and I got to know the guy. and made my own case. It was a good criminal case.
Mm-hmm.
But the charges weren't gambling related. The charges were based off the animal fighting and animal cruelty statutes in the state of Indiana. So long story short on that, or moving on, I should say.
See, I didn't even have to prod you. That's that body language thing.
Yeah, I could see you tensing up and leaning toward me, and I was like, okay, time to click on forward.
You're a good sport.
Yeah, so that case got the Indiana Gaming Commission, Gaming Control Division, and that got we got notoriety off of that case with the animal rights people. The animal rights organizations started like, oh, here's a department in Indiana at the state level that will go after animal fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, we started getting phone calls, and we started getting tips, and we started getting inundated with animal fighting cases.
Yeah.
And I was ignorant to the whole thing, the animal rights movement. I was ignorant to that. I was a cop, focused on cop stuff, and
not only that, but you grew up in Morgan County, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if PETA held a rally back in those days down in Martinsville, it wouldn't have been good for them. They would
No. No, there would have been, I mean, who knows what some of the local, I mean, this community and even the way I was raised in rural Indiana, rural Morgan County.
You grew up hunting, trapping, fishing.
Yeah.
You've got a farm going on right here. There's meat in your smoker. So let's just dispel the rumor that you're a vegan or an animal rights activist or anything like that.
Yep. And that's been a tough one. And man, that's a tough one to dispel when your audience learns where I went next.
Right.
That's why it's tough.
I wanted to get in front of it.
Yep. No, okay, let's go back to that. I was born and raised here on this piece of land where I live now. This was a cow pasture where my house and garage is sitting right now. This was a cattle pasture, and that was in the 70s. We grew up. We were a poor family. We were a big Brady Bunch family, and we didn't have any money. My dad worked at the post office, and we lived a very self-sufficient lifestyle. Mm-hmm. We raised animals to butcher and eat, and we hunted, we trapped. My dad worked so much that we didn't get a lot of first-hand experience with him hunting and fishing and trapping. He was a busy working man. But we were so blessed to have a couple of neighbors that were just, I mean, like mountain men out of a book. These guys, Mark and Stan Gray, were brothers that they took us under their wing. And when I say us, they're all me and all my brothers and a lot of the other neighborhood kids. And we hunted and we trapped all up and down these creeks and river bottoms down here. I'm not very far from White River.
Yeah.
And we would trap muskrat and once in a while a beaver. We'd get lucky enough to trap a beaver. And we hunted rabbits, mostly small game. You know, when I was a kid, it was
that's all was here.
Yeah.
I mean, deer hunting was
squirrels and
not what it is today.
Yeah.
You grew up the same way I did, John.
I mean, I grew up that way. We had guns in our hands at a young age, and we weren't a threat to anybody.
Right.
And, you know, we got big old-timer knives for Christmas when we were little kids.
Right.
You know, all that. I mean, that's just the way we were raised.
Right.
We were running around out here with no shoes and no shirt on all summer long and down in the creeks catching frogs and doing what kids did back then.
Yep.
But that's, so getting back to fast-forwarding 30, 40, however many years it was. I'm getting old. We got the attention, the Gaming Commission, Gaming Control Division got the attention of these animal rights groups. And my boss and I both got flown to D.C. To receive an award at this elaborate ceremony. The Humane Society of the United States put on this elaborate ceremony, and we received the Humane Law Enforcement Award. I believe it was 2010. I still have that award somewhere packed away just because it's an important part of my history. But we met Wayne Pacell, who was the CEO of HSUS at the time.
That's like meeting Osama bin Laden for my crowd. I'll just tell you right now.
Well, I have pictures, just so your crowd knows, I have pictures of shaking hands with this guy. It's part of the big scheme. It's part of the big picture of why these organizations bring law enforcement in, befriend law enforcement, offer these awards, this notoriety. You know, law enforcement has a lot of negative stuff going on all the time, but these were happy stories because they involve rescuing animals.
Right.
These poor defenseless animals, you know. And anytime these animal rights organizations can get law enforcement, you see it all the time.
It's a feel-good story.
Yep.
Even when you look at, you know, the animal rights crowd works very hard to put a very negative light and paint hunters with a broad brush that we're bloodthirsty. But even we care deeply about our animals.
Absolutely.
Whether it be a bear we're chasing, you know, there's coon hunters that spend thousands of dollars a year filling feeders to help wildlife and feed wildlife. And then not to mention the partnership you have with a hound. But the HSUS and this other group that you went to work for spend a lot of money trying to paint us in a light that doesn't represent who we are.
Absolutely. And not only hunters, but any industry that has animals as an integral part of the industry, whether it be our food production, whether it be the rodeo industry, circuses. They've basically shut circuses down. They've achieved that.
Right. Before we get down that path too far, let's move forward to where you went after Indiana Gaming Commission. What your job was. Let's set that part up.
Yep. So with the HSUS and that I don't know this firsthand, but I understand the winds of politics at the state level and the way that people can start getting pressured and influenced to get away from working with an organization like HSUS, especially in the state of Indiana. So I don't know this firsthand, but I believe what happened was my boss started to get pressure from higher ups in the state of Indiana to move away from working with the Humane Society of the United States on these cases because it wasn't looking good. It wasn't looking good. And it made this law enforcement department, this Indiana Gaming Control Division, IGC, it started to give them a bad it just looked like they were getting away from some of the values and important things that the state of Indiana.
They were catering to a special interest.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, but we still needed the assistance, or at least we thought we did, of one of these organizations that can handle animals in a case. And let me just say this because we haven't mentioned this. In law enforcement, when you seize evidence, and you'll get this more than anybody because your background as a conservation officer, you can seize any kind of criminal evidence and package it up, put it in the evidence room, and be done, walk away, and go your next case. You can't do that with live animals.
Right.
You have to be able to house those live animals and feed them and tend to them every day. There has to be a vet there. There has to be... So when you're on an animal fighting case and you go into a property and you seize, whether it be one or two animals or hundreds in some cases, I saw cases, and this goes along with what we're getting ready to go and delve into now, but I saw cases where there were thousands of animals seized throughout the country. And so we moved away from working with the Humane Society of the United States, and we chose the lesser of two evils, the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, ASPCA. The ASPCA and HSUS, although they have the same agendas, the same ultimate goal, they were at odds with each other, and they were fighting for donor money. Whoever could put the saddest commercial on TV and to solicit for those donations, they were the winner. They're all donor funded. The American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and the Humane Society of the United States are fully donor funded. They're 501c3 organizations. They are not government entities. They have zero law enforcement authority. So we started working with the ASPCA, the Gaming Commission. ASPCA would come in at a moment's notice. They would roll in with all kinds of equipment. They would fully fund housing these animals from these animal fighting cases.
Which is a big banner and that's a problem solver for a law enforcement agency that doesn't have the facility, the personnel, all the logistics that go along with housing those animals. And that's why it's so attractive and why it's easy to, because at that point you're standing here, a police officer standing here on scene of, I've got to seize this evidence. What the heck am I going to do with it?
Exactly. Exactly.
And then you've got, we're here to help you.
That's it. And we're here to help you. We're the animal experts. This is what we do every day of our lives.
Yeah.
We have the equipment, and it's not going to cost your department or your state or your county or your city a dime. Not going to cost you a dime. In fact, we'll even give you a grant.
Let's circle back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to work? That's why
I went to this is a cliffhanger. We're just dragging this out. I'm dragging it out. So the ASPCA, I was the guy, the animal fighting guy, and I got to meet these guys, and they were on the surface seemed like just good old boys. A lot of them were from Missouri. One of them was a retired highway patrolman from Missouri, so he and I hit it off right away.
Right.
And they said, "Man, you need to come to work for us. We can pay you a lot more money than what you're making. And for a cop, you're always looking for that. Where am I going to go next?
Right.
I don't really. What does a retired cop do?
If you want to make money, you don't make podcasts. I'll tell you that. Okay.
Yeah. So I went to work for them. And my title at the time was Northeast Regional Investigator. And this is all available on a simple Google search.
Mm-hmm.
Type in John Bolin ASPCA and you'll see where they hired me. And so they flew me to New York City, and, here I am, Martinsville country boy, never been to New York City before. And they flew me into New York City, and the ASPCA owns a huge piece of real estate in Manhattan.
Right.
Huge building. Their headquarters are there. And I'm in awe. Of course I'm unarmed for the first time in a long, long time. I'm in New York City, one of the places that I always never dreamed I would ever go to and had no desire to go to. And I'm unarmed. So I'm uneasy about that. I'd been armed all my life up to that point. And I'm there for orientation. And it's just totally mind-numbing. And now that I'm talking about and thinking back about it, I probably had some second thoughts. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm out of my comfort zone here big time.
Right.
But it was good money, and it was I became the kind of the law enforcement go-to guy for the ASPCA. I became that guy that law enforcement officers throughout the country, not just my state anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But the Gaming Commission, all the guys I used to work for in the department, still, they leaned on me as the animal fighting expert now at the ASPCA level. So they had a guy within the organization now that they could call at a moment's notice, anytime, 24/7, and ask for information. How do I type this probable cause on this? How do I, can your department help us? Can the ASPCA help us? And of course the answer was always yes, because they had an inside guy now.
So we're going to dig down into this a little bit more. I kind of want to set this up, why it's important that we talk to you and what message here is relevant for houndsmen, because these groups have tried to paint hound hunting and hunting with hounds as animal fighting, and that's how they try to get their traction and appeal to that emotional side. And you went to work for an organization that is definitely in that fight and has been involved. Even our houndsmen are vulnerable to unreasonable searches and seizures, things that they aren't maybe well versed in, or maybe they're even bullied into submitting to this sort of stuff. And you worked in those levels, but you don't now. So let's skip that part of the sandwich, and let's go to how you left, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the parts and why it's important, because I think this is huge.
Right. So I was there for a little over 3 years. It wasn't very long into that time period that red flags were flying up all over the place for me. I was seeing a lot of questionable practices with it. The biggest thing for me was just the outright disingenuous backbiting and their nasty attitude toward law enforcement in general. They secretly despised law enforcement. Although they knew they had to have law enforcement, they have to have law enforcement to come onto your property to seize anything. It has to be a criminal case. They don't have law enforcement authority.
Right.
So they become the so-called expert that's written into the probable cause affidavit for the search warrant. It gives them the right, as they become an agent of that law enforcement department. And they're written in to the probable cause, giving them authority to go onto the property just as if they were a police officer.
And you were helping.
I was helping.
You were helping ASPCA get their foot in the door with law enforcement to be able to enter the property.
They hired me to gain credibility with law enforcement.
Okay.
That was their sole purpose for hiring me.
What did they tell you, though?
They told me that I was being hired as an investigator, that I would investigate allegations of animal cruelty
because
on any scale.
Because who doesn't get, nobody wants to see, whether it's a bunch of poodles or it's a bunch of hounds or it's a bunch of horses. We as human beings, we don't want to see that, and we know that those types of real crimes, not emotionally charged, not hyperbolic, emotionally charged stuff, but real crimes need to be investigated. And I think I can speak for houndsmen that, man, I don't want somebody representing me that's not feeding his dogs properly, not taking care of his dogs.
Right.
I don't want that guy getting raided by the sheriff's department and his picture being out there. I'm totally against that. So from our conversations, what I've heard you say, that's why you went to work for the ASPCA, because you saw that 10% of good stuff. You wanted that. It was righteous,
Well, that was part of it, but
Okay.
I won't go in. I won't try to say or create this persona for myself that I was
a crusader for animal rights.
Yeah, because
Okay.
in my opinion, growing up on a farm and seeing animal husbandry firsthand, bulls, cattle being dehorned, cattle and hogs and every other animal on a farm being castrated. This is animal husbandry. And it seems extremely cruel and extremely violent sometimes. But my idea of animal cruelty when I went to work for the ASPCA was
it seems cruel and violent without context.
Right.
When you're the person that is doing it and growing it, and you understand the whole lifespan of that animal, then you can put some context to it, and you start to understand why some of those things are done.
Right.
And
And it was the same way with trapping, as you well know, and your listeners well know, that oftentimes when you run that trap line, there's live animals there. that have to be dispatched.
Right.
And these animal rights organizations are, we'll get into, of course, deeper and deeper into their true agenda, but to get back on track where we were, I truthfully, in complete transparency here, like we discussed before you even fired this recorder up, I went to work for the ASPCA because it paid really well. And I didn't have any idea what an animal hoarder was, what a puppy mill was, what a factory farm was. These are all their terms. I even to say their catchphrases leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
But these are the terms that we have all come to understand or know, we think we understand. They're propaganda terms.
Right.
And so anyway, my first red flag at the ASPCA was I went to my boss and I said, as a law enforcement officer, I'll do two of these red flags back to back because it's the same person. And she no longer works there, but she was the director of investigations at the ASPCA. How she got the position, God only knows. But I said, hey, in law enforcement, if we're going to be an expert on something, we have to go through a lot of training. And where am I are you sending me to training? Because other than animal fighting cases, I don't know the first thing about investigating any kind of animal cruelty whatsoever. I have no clue. The animal control people or Humane Society, local Humane Society did all that stuff when I was a cop. We didn't do it. And she said, oh, we're going to teach you everything you need to know right here. To me, that was the first great big red flag. I was like, oh, really? So we're a department or a group of self-proclaimed experts that are all self-taught within this department. That sounds like a cult to me.
Right.
And I had a problem with that. That was my first little red flag that went up that gave me, you have to understand that I had worked 7 years undercover prior to taking this job, and I investigated some pretty high-level organized crime people.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about animal fighting, although there were some serious cartel connections to some of the animal fighting in the state of Indiana. But I'm talking about bookmaking, sports betting, which is legal now in the state of Indiana. But when I worked there, it was not. And I investigated I knew the investigative tactics and techniques, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And when I saw this, I began to have some reservations and I started to really pay attention from a different perspective. From that ex-cop
Like, do these people really know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Am I getting played?
Yeah, exactly.
Am I being used?
Exactly. And the next immediate red flag was my first report that I submitted to the same individual. I submitted a report, and again, not bragging, but just lending credibility to where we're going with this. I had submitted reports at every level in the justice system throughout this country. I had submitted reports at the county, city, state, and federal level. I had submitted information, probable cause, and information for indictments, federal indictments. I had submitted information to obtain, to get to the ability to have federal wiretaps on cases and things like that. So I knew how to type a report.
Right.
And I knew at the end of the report that you were writing this report under the penalties of perjury. At the end of a report, you would say, I swear and affirm that the foregoing information is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. Well, I submitted a report to her, and it came back to me heavily edited. And I said, what's this? I said, I know how to write a report. This isn't my report. This isn't my verbiage. This isn't my... She said, well, that's how we do it. And I said, no, that's not how we do it. This is not my report. And she said, John, you're not a cop anymore. You're not a cop anymore.
Yeah.
And the disrespect to law enforcement became really obvious.
So what she was saying is,
you're going to do it my way.
Yeah.
And this
is not how we write a report to satisfy our ends,
our
our
agenda,
means.
our ends. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I bristled. I mean, I'm not the kind of guy that I'm not putting my name on something if it ain't mine.
Right.
And I bristled, and I told her, I said, look, that's okay if that's what you're going to do, if you're going to edit every one of my reports. And she edited every investigator's report, heavily edited, sometimes added paragraphs, sometimes removed paragraphs.
Wow.
Yes, their agenda, their propaganda, it has to fit their narrative. It has to fit. She didn't want an objective approach. She didn't want a law enforcement approach to what I observed. She wanted a clear path to their agenda, to their propaganda. It had to fit the narrative, like you said.
Integrity, honesty had no bearing on
no
it.
No bearing whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, that's fine. But I said, from now on, when I submit a report, it's going to indicate that this report was edited. And because I will not stand in a courtroom and raise my right hand and testify that this report is a true and accurate representation of what I witnessed. I won't do it. And I just wanted the opportunity so badly. I never had the opportunity in court where a defense attorney said, Mr. Bolin, is this your, I was wanting so badly to say, nope, it's not. It's not. I wanted to expose that in a courtroom because then it becomes record. Yeah. It becomes a record then. I never got the opportunity to expose it in a courtroom.
Why not? Why didn't you ever get the opportunity?
I never had to testify to one of these cases that in a courtroom. Most of them pled out. These people can't fight this system. You can't, when you get the ASPCA, or I shouldn't say can't fight it, because there have been a few rare incidents in this country, even while I was there, cases that I had a lot of heavy involvement in where people fought and won. Civil cases against the ASPCA and HSUS.
You're not the only former employee of ASPCA. Why aren't there other people that are coming out that have had bad experiences with ASPCA?
They're terrified. First of all, they're bound up legally, and I'll get to that. But they're terrified of these organizations. You just look at in the hunting community specifically, trophy hunting especially, the ones that, the dentist here a few years ago that went somewhere and killed a lion.
Right.
He was destroyed. Absolutely destroyed by these people. And they destroy their character. It's character assassination. They go after them. That's one of many, many, many examples of anybody that wants to go out and show any kind of sense of pride in what they do, whether it be hunting or rodeo or raising livestock or whatever it is. Any sense of pride or any kind of advertisement that you want to do based on your animal related business or hobby. Be careful when you do it, because these people are there watching. But to get back to your question, I am the only individual that ever worked at that level at the ASPCA. I was in the Field Investigations Response Group. They've since renamed themselves the National Field Response, NFR, and they've taken all of their profiles and bios off the internet. You can't see them anymore. But I was the only one at that level that when I resigned, I requested an exit interview, and they denied my exit interview, and I kept copies of all this email. That's another thing that I started doing as an investigator. When all these red flags start going up, I started documenting everything.
CYA, baby.
Yep, I documented everything. And
I did that working for the state.
Yep. And I won't go into detail how I documented everything, but it's documented, and it's in safe places. If they ever decided they wanted to come out, they haven't said a word. I resigned in December of 2017, and I haven't, other than getting threats from the former highway patrolman at 2 a.m.
Really?
A text message, yeah.
Wow. And you documented that, and it's in a safe place. Oh, you better
believe it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I screenshotted the text and put it on Twitter. I'm not on social media anymore, but I put it out there for the world to see how cowardly he was. and still works for them.
So you got out of there without signing.
I got out of there, and when they refused my exit interview, I was the only person that I knew of up to that point that was refused an exit interview. They did not want me in the HR department in New York City telling everything that I knew. They didn't want that. They blocked that exit interview. In doing that, they failed to have me sign a non-disclosure. What they normally, their process is you would resign, even if you were fired, which I resigned on my own. I was never disciplined, written up for anything. I never had any issues other than they didn't like me going against the grain. I was a burr under their saddle for a long time. And when I resigned and they refused the exit interview, they failed that little link in the chain to protect themselves. They failed to offer me a severance package. The severance package always came with the non-disclosure. We're going to for example, we're going to give you 6 months pay, but you need to sign here.
Right.
That you'll never disclose what you saw, how we operate at this level. And they didn't have me do that.
So you're off the chain.
I'm off the chain. I'm off and running.
And what are you doing as far as you do quite a bit of traveling and speaking and different things on this issue? And you travel around the United States.
That started in 2018, February 2018. I was very fortunate. I always give credit where credit's due. People that have helped me along the way and opened doors for me. A man by the name of Trent Luce has a show, several actually, but he has one called Rural Route Radio.
Right.
And it's out west. He's central Nebraska, 6th or 7th generation rancher, farmer in Nebraska. And he's been a real important, outspoken advocate for agriculture and animal ownership. And I started an anonymous Twitter account as a whistleblower against the ASPCA because at the time I just assumed I was going to get sued. I assumed they would shut me down, tie me up in court. I mean, they have billions of dollars at their disposal, these animal rights organizations combined. Unlimited money and power. The unlimited lobbying power they have in D.C. and every state house is mind-blowing. Your listeners, nobody ever has any idea how much power they have.
I want to get to that part because I want to, but go ahead.
So, I started this Twitter account and an organization called Protect the Harvest that was founded by Forrest Lucas right here in Indiana, Forrest Lucas of Lucas Oil. He founded an organization called Protect the Harvest, and they are all about exposing the real agenda of animal rights extremists and stuff and protecting our right to own and use animals. And they saw that Twitter account. In fact, I probably tagged them in my comments. I'm sure I did because I was looking for a platform. I was looking for a way. Mainstream media won't touch this.
No.
They don't want anything to do with, they want the feel-good stories about animals.
Sure.
Recently, and this is a great story. I'm not saying that it's not, but recently there was one that was all over all of the national media. A dog was caught in a storm sewer, and they cut the road out, and they went in and cut all levels of roadway out and rescued this dog from the storm sewer. That's a great story. I'm not saying it's not. If that was my dog, you met one of my dogs this morning. If that was him, I would have done the same thing. I would have expected the fire department and the street department to come and help me get my dog out of the storm drain. But they'll touch those. They're all over those feel-good stories.
Yeah.
But they won't say a word about the lies, the propaganda, the violations of your civil rights, the violations of your constitutional rights that are committed by these organizations, the threat that they pose to our livelihood, to feeding the masses. They won't touch any of that. So I was fortunate. Protect the Harvest started communicating with me, and then the word got to Trent. And Trent started communicating with me on direct messaging and stuff like that until I felt comfortable enough to talk to him on the phone.
Right. So
then we went to telephone conversations leading up to, he said, I want you on my show. I want you to come on my show. And I said, look, I'll do it. I'm honored that you would ask me to do it. And his audience is millions, out west mainly.
Mm-hmm.
But he So we agreed that I would go on his show, but we wouldn't mention the ASPCA because, again, the legality. That was collectively our choice between the two of us. So the first couple of interviews I think that I did with him, I just said I worked for an animal rights organization, a national animal rights organization. Then finally, I was like, you know what? I got to say who they are. I got to say who they are. So we just started saying who they were. And then I was, like you said, started to get invitations to speak. I spoke at a symposium in Denver, Colorado. I've spoken all over the state of Indiana to different dog breeding groups, and Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania.
You were just in Pennsylvania last week.
Yep. I was over.
Talked to you while you were on the road headed that way.
Yep. And recently I was on a national tour called the Arise USA tour. Trent invited me to join him. There were 5 tour buses on this thing, speakers covering different topics, and Trent's main topics were agriculture related and environmental related. And I joined him on that tour, and I had the opportunity to speak. I lost count how many states. I joined him in California, and we went everywhere.
State to state.
State to state, and ended up coming back, and we had an event here in Indiana, in Martinsville, and I jumped off the tour after that, and just because I had too much going on here at home, and the tour was winding down at that point. It was headed out east and winding down, but
so all the things you've seen, since this is a hunting podcast, it's focused. Our main focus is hunting with hounds, and the ethical pursuit of game while using hounds, and legitimizing the hunting with hounds as a valid management tool. One of the things that I think is important to do is show a crossover of how the things that you have seen, the things that you have witnessed, how can that be helpful to my audience? What kind of, if you've gone around and you've talked to the agriculture world, what do you have to say to the hunting world as it pertains to the animal rights movement?
The same thing that I would say to the agriculture world, and a lot of your listeners on your podcast are crossovers. They're going to be raising animals too, because most of them are rural people. And I'm not taking anything away from anyone that lives in the city that hunts with hounds. I mean, they're but most are rural. So your audience they're raising animals too. They're raising livestock. They may have hogs, cattle, chickens, whatever. So it is a very interesting, unique audience. But what I'll say is the same thing I say to the other people I've spoken to. You have to be involved in your community. And when I say involved, and this is the big thing, Chris. We all like to talk about these things. We all like to hear about these things. People like to have a voice. I get wonderful receptions when I speak because I'm saying the things that people want to say. At a level where they don't have the time or the knowledge or whatever to do it.
Or the experience.
The experience or the willingness to do it. First and foremost, your county sheriff. You need to know who he is. You need to take time to introduce yourself to him, and you need to ask some very direct questions. You need to ask him, have any of your officers been trained by law enforcement or by animal rights organizations? That's a big question that needs to be asked. Unfortunately, the National Sheriff's Association is in bed with these organizations in a big way. And I would like to say it's just because of ignorance, but we can't say that because these aren't stupid people.
Right.
The leaders of the National Sheriff's Association are intelligent, lifelong law enforcement guys that have seen just about everything you can see, but they've made a choice to be involved in these organizations, with these organizations. The Humane Society of the United States has a training division that all they do is they hire current and former law enforcement officers to go all over the country training law enforcement in how to investigate animal cruelty.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, people would be like, well, that's great. That's a wonderful thing, because they're not charging. It's not costing the sheriff's department anything. This is free training.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at their big end goal, their main goal is to stop all animal ownership. And you know, I've had people say, "Oh, come on now, John, that's extreme. That can't be. They can't possibly want."
Right.
Yes, they do. They either want to stop animal ownership or so heavily regulate it, tie it up in so many state, federal, and local regulations that you just throw up your hands and walk away from it. Say, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to raise these dogs anymore, because now there's a county ordinance or a city ordinance that's pushing. Let me tell you, Chris, and let me stress this to your listeners. These animal rights people are not just sitting in D.C. and New York City. They are in your local meetings, and you're not.
That's huge. We talk about this, and I call it, you got to take time to come off the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love being in the mountain. I love on the mountain, in the woods, in this, you know, wherever I'm chasing my hounds, I love to be there.
Yep.
But I've got to be paying attention to what's going on around me, and being engaged at that county commissioner level, so that they're not passing an unreasonable local ordinance against my ability to own the hounds that define my lifestyle.
Right.
You know, of who I am and what I love to do. And when we don't take time to do that, we are just behind the eight ball. So did you ever see anything that came across your desk and you're like, you're going to call this animal cruelty?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was pretty much blown out of proportion, or that they tried to make a mountain out of a molehill? Or was ASPCA pretty strategic on what they chose to go after?
They wanted to get involved. Anytime, if someone would call the ASPCA, for example, they call the New York number, and they want to report animal cruelty anywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Those calls would first go through the director of investigations, the individual I'd mentioned earlier, and then she would send them out to an investigator to look into. Now, again, the ASPCA has no law enforcement authority, so what was their tactic? How did they handle that?
This is the part we need to talk about.
Okay,
this
great.
is getting to the meat.
Mm-hmm. So you, Miss Do-Gooder, Miss or Mr. Do-Gooder, driving down a county road and sees something that they think is unacceptable,
Mm-hmm.
livestock or whatever.
Hounds.
Hounds running a fence line.
Or
after
tied out.
something, or tied out. You name it, anything.
You can make up whatever you want.
They see
They're
it.
not living in the house getting fat on
Right.
Nutter Butters, so the dog must be mistreated.
It must be. It must be miserable.
Yeah.
And they'll get on their phone. I'm calling the ASPCA. This is ridiculous. Something needs to be done. They'll get on the phone, call the New York number, and it'll filter down and it say that it was in Indiana. It didn't have to be in Indiana. I was assigned to the northeast region of the country. My territory was anywhere north and east of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maine, Massachusetts, you name it. And, northeast was my territory, and my home state, Indiana. And that changed over the course of the few years I was there, where it expanded really basically to anywhere in the country. I had cases in California and everywhere. But so she would call me and she'd say, John, I got this complaint about, and I'm going to use one that was an actual scenario, upstate New York. She said, we got this call. These people drove by a pasture and there was a cow that looked like it was in distress. What the hell does that mean?
Exactly.
In distress. It's another animal rights catchword. there's so many of them that I'll share with your listeners as time goes on. What more segments of whatever we do, but I want to educate your listeners on all of their tactics and their terminology. That's my lifelong goal now.
Good.
Is to spin this around and educate everyone on the way they operate and drive them deeper and deeper into the darkness of what they're doing. This is arrogant to say, and I have no way to back this up, but I do take a little bit of credit in the fact that the ASPCA has, their so-called investigations division has gone dark.
Yeah.
They're not out, their bios aren't out there anymore because I'm talking about these people. Their VP, Vice President of Investigations, is a retired FBI agent now. You won't find that on their website. Retired FBI agent.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to this complaint. So I say, okay, there's a cow in distress. I call the complainant and I say, hey, I got this information. Can you tell me what you saw and what happened? Well, yeah, there was this cow standing out by the road in this, farm field, and she just looked like maybe she was
had a bellyache.
Yeah, something wasn't right. Something wasn't right. She wasn't with the other cows, and so I call the New York State Police, and it's always prefaced by, "Hi, my name's John Bolin. I'm investigator with the ASPCA. I'm a former law enforcement officer." I always laid that. You know how it is. If you get a call from a former law enforcement officer and you're a former law enforcement officer, there's immediate credibility, camaraderie, brotherhood there.
Right.
That's why they hired me. That's why they hire former law enforcement. That's why they pay current law enforcement officers to go out and do their training. So I said, yeah, would you mind checking it out? And the guy's like, yeah, absolutely. I know who that is. I know that location. I know that farmer, that dairy farmer. He said, yeah, I'm sure that it's nothing, but I'll go check it for you. He went and checked, and that was a cow that was calving.
Right.
I mean, people don't – thank God that the calf wasn't, halfway coming out. I mean, who knows what these people would have thought then. They would, this cow's dying. Her uterus is hanging out. Or, I mean, they would.
Yeah.
God only knows what they would say. It's ignorance.
Another cow is trying to breach the back end of an adult cow, and they have no clue. And it goes back to that thing that we've talked about so many times, John. We talked about it before we got started here. The farther people get away from the farm, the more out of touch they become, the more ignorant they become. And the more out of touch they come with what the natural world is.
That's it.
They just simply cannot. And I think there's a strong sense of guilt in our American culture now because only 3% of our population has any sort of ties to agriculture other than what they're only tied to agriculture is picking up fresh produce out of the grocery aisle or, finding some GMO safe meat to buy out of the case, and they don't even know what the heck that is.
Right. But that's so interesting that you go ahead. But
they have this sense of guilt because deep down inside, they are still wired to be stewards of the land. They're still wired to be into animal husbandry. That's why you see all this passionate care for a cat and a dog and all that stuff. If we were back in the old days, they would have a farm and they'd have chickens and they'd have all this stuff. Their house sits behind a locked gate and their whole neighborhood is taking up valuable wildlife habitat, and deep down they know it. So what do? They put their energy into all this foolishness.
You're absolutely right.
So I can get fired up too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you get it. And there's so much I'm so thankful that this door has opened.
Me too.
That we can communicate to a different audience here than what I've been communicating. I've wanted to share with your audience, with this type of an audience. And,
I don't think there's any other segment of hunting that can be more. We are definitely on the front lines of it to being impacted by the animal rights movement, and that's why I thought it was so important that we got you on here, because not only can you talk the talking points, but you can give us insight in how to be prepared to face this, or at least tell us what we're up against. And we're definitely not going to be able to cover it all in one podcast. So I'm looking forward to building this relationship and getting you in touch with, network you with some organizations that need your expertise. And I think it's going to be huge. But I do want to talk a little bit more about how. I think this is a 101 class. This is John Bolin has credibility. You need to listen to what he's trying to tell you here, and we will build on this thing. Everything we'll get to the, protecting your constitutional rights and all this other stuff. But houndsmen need to understand what they're up against and who the enemy is. We can't face the enemy, and we can't be effective if we don't know who they are.
Right.
And you have been on the inside of that. You're almost like Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves,
I wish.
Beautiful
part of South Dakota. Wow, I've been there. That's beautiful.
But just that part where he had been with the Army, and then he was able to show the Sioux, the dark parts of that, and he said, they hate me like no other because they think I'm a traitor.
Right.
And you're there.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
have the ability to be that guy.
The animal rights community despises me. They despise me. They don't want. I went into a local when I was talking about they're at your local meetings. I was in northern Indiana at a zoning meeting, and I was invited there by Craig Curry from Protect the Harvest, and he joined me. And they didn't know who we were. Nobody there knew who we were. But the animal rights people that were there, that were pushing for a change in this ordinance, and this I don't even remember the details of the ordinance, but it was going to affect animal owners in this small community. They were pushing, and they thought that they really had some wind behind what they were doing. And I stood up and introduced myself and testified at this meeting about the animal rights agenda and who I was, my background. And these people, you could have heard a pin drop. Those animal rights people, they went out of there with their tails between their legs. And I'm only telling you that because they didn't expect it. They didn't expect any kind of fight. They're so used to pushing their agenda through, ramrodding their agenda through at every level without resistance, that when they do meet resistance, they don't know how to handle that. They're not used to that.
Well, I think part of the reason why they've been successful is because they have got their talking points down very well. And the reason we produce podcasts like this for our listeners is so that they can start to develop the narrative that they need when they go to that meeting. But
let me tell you something let me speak directly to your listeners right now. I'm including myself with your listeners because you've seen my setup here at my house, and you've seen, you know me initially. What your first impression is of me is I want to be on my little piece of the world, and I want to be left alone. I want to be self-sufficient.
Right.
And I was raised that way. It doesn't mean that I have any kind of ill will toward anyone else that chooses any other lifestyle. You want to go to the grocery store and get your stuff and not have any idea where it comes from, that's your life, do it. If you're a vegan and you want to live on carrots and mushrooms, that's your life, do it. But don't force it on me. Don't force your ways and your beliefs on me and get nasty about it. What I'm going to say right now to your listeners is, and I don't know where that little rant even fits into what I'm getting ready to say, but I tend to do that because I'm passionate about this. I get fired up about it. It all boils down to your constitutional rights. It all boils down to, by God, you have a right. You have a right in a free country to own animals. You have a right to own hunting hounds and to put your time and effort into those hounds, into getting them exactly where you want them, how you want them, over generations, those traits that you want to keep and the traits you don't want, to go out and enjoy yourself in the woods, hunting, whatever it is you want to do. That's the American way. We're free people here. These animal rights extremists, and I have to differentiate sometimes animal rights extremism and animal welfare organizations, because there are some great animal welfare organizations. And I want to say this very quickly and get back to my point. There are 43,000 animal-related nonprofit organizations in the United States of America. 43,000. So if you think animals aren't important to the people of this country, then all you have to do is look at that. Now, those animal organizations are not necessarily one or the other. I mean, you're talking about the Pork Producers Association, sure, the beef cattle, the eggs, dairy, hunting,
right?
AKC, different. I'm talking about 43,000 total, over 43,000. And I don't have the numbers here in front of me, but it's a multi-billion, with a B, multi-billion-dollar industry. Mm-hmm. These nonprofit organizations focused on animals in one way or another. I said that, my borderline hermit lifestyle that I live, and my self-sufficient lifestyle, I said that for a point. The animal rights groups are counting on that. They're counting on you houndsmen, you hunters, you fishermen, you trappers. They're counting on you to stay in your own little piece of the world and keep your mouth shut. They're counting on you to live by those old-fashioned standards and values of you mind your own business. Mm-hmm. Let your neighbor do him and you do you. You mind your own business. They're not bothering me. They're not bothering me. I've had hounds. My dad had hounds. My grandpa had hounds. And we've never been bothered. We're respected in our community. That's the key, folks. That's the key. Just because you have history, long history in what you're doing, just because historically the country and your state and your community has supported what you're doing, doesn't mean that you're safe. I'm here to sound the alarm. I'm here to sound the alarm. You may be the last people that these animal rights people go after. You may be. But I can guarantee you are on their radar. You are there. You are on their radar. Mm-hmm. And if they can villainize you, they're going to villainize you. They're going to destroy you. Mm-hmm. But what they would prefer to do is sneak into your meetings where you never go. There's people listening on this podcast right now. There's a vast majority of this audience wouldn't even know where to go for a zoning meeting. They'd have to look it up. They'd have to call somebody and ask them, where is the zoning meetings? Where's the county council meetings? Where's the county commissioner meetings? What's my sheriff's name? What are the deputies' names? They don't know.
The animal rights activists know that.
The animal rights activists know it. They've got databases full of this information. They update it on a regular basis. They know exactly where they are, exactly where the meetings are. They know in D.C. at the federal level when any kind of bill is being put forth that's agriculture or animal related, because they're the lobbyist machine behind it. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that go and get your left-wing senators and congressmen to sponsor these bills. They're the driving force behind it.
Yeah.
And not just left-wingers. There's a lot of Republicans. There's a lot of rhinos out there that are eroding the rights of animal ownership.
Right.
Because they want to get along with these people. It's a feel-good thing. Oh, we passed a new animal bill in the state. It's going to protect.
It plays well. Plays well in the media.
It's great media.
You can spin off of that, and
it's great.
And so, man, that is so powerful. That's a powerful message right there. The animal rights activists, and we've tried to stress this so many times on this show, that they are well organized, they're well funded, and they have done the homework. And you said they may not come after us, but hound hunting by far is the easiest mark. It's the low-hanging fruit on the tree, and they will never be satisfied with just getting that. And this is what I want to say to anybody out there that's listening to this podcast that has never owned a hound or has no desire to own a hound. If you're a deer hunter, if you're a turkey hunter, if you're a fisherman, then you need to wake up to this. Mm-hmm. You have got to wake up. And John, there's nobody that can bring this message to us at the level that you can with your experience and the things that you've done. And I know you've been worried about bragging on yourself, but you've got the experience, you've got the expertise, you've got the ability to deliver that message. And I'm going to use you like a borrowed mule,
Well,
I mean,
there's got to be a purpose. Like I was telling you about the conversation I had with my son yesterday. There's got to be a purpose for where I am now. I started out, as a deputy sheriff and went up through the ranks, and it took a turn into this animal rights thing. I never saw it coming. But thank God the way that I was raised and the way that I was trained in law enforcement is what you say, what you put on paper, and what you speak publicly is record, and it's either gonna, the truth is going to help others, but if you lie, if I was sitting here talking about a subject that I had just read about, I have no credibility. It'd be a waste of your time and your listeners' time.
Right.
But this is where I'm at. This is where it's led to. Every time I speak, I'm standing on a stage, the first thing I say is, let me tell you how I got to stand behind this podium.
Right.
I have to tell you how I ended up here.
Right.
And that's what I would say to your listeners. It's a wake-up call. I quote, and from my law enforcement experience, this is something that we didn't talk about on the podcast. You and I talked about it previously. We haven't talked about during this recording, but part of my experience in law enforcement was my entire career I was in training also.
Mm-hmm.
I trained law enforcement officers in close quarter combat. I trained, and I'm not a badass. There's a bunch of people out here whip my ass in a heartbeat. But I trained close quarter combat. I trained what we called physical tactics, officers and physical tactics. I was a field training officer for everything related to law enforcement. I trained SWAT teams in tactical knife. And I use, there's two authors, two books or authors that I always go back to, and it's so relevant.
John Grossman.
You got it. Grossman, and one that goes way, way back. The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Sun Tzu, Art of War.
Yep.
I've referred to the Art of War as, animal rights activists and the organizers, they've read the Art of War.
Yeah.
They know what it is.
That's
and if
right.
you look at it, you can see that they implement those types of tactics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another one that they use regularly too. It's the some rules of radicals or something like that.
By Saul Alinsky.
Yeah, Saul Alinsky. Yep. But the
These
Art of
people
War,
are not dumb people.
No, they're not.
Well-read.
They're well-read, highly educated for the most part. A lot of them have master's degrees, PhDs.
Yeah.
These are people that they've come up through the
All right.
The indoctrination of.
Do they really care about animals, John? I mean, do they, or are they looking for a paycheck? Are they looking for the donation?
They're looking for that. It's almost like, I'm not going to say that they don't. I'm not going to do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
What they do is they'll lump in an entire industry into one big heap and say, we got to set fire to it. It's got to go.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do that. I'm not going to do that because that's not true. There are good people within the organizations, usually at a local level is where your good people are. Your people that are not making any money whatsoever to be your humane
I'm glad
society.
You does it. Yeah.
To be
I wanted to go there.
Yeah, your animal control people. These are good people at a local level. The big thing there, Chris, is these are people that are held accountable for their actions because they're dealing with people they're going to see that evening at Walmart.
Exactly.
They're dealing with people that they grew up with in a community. They're held accountable for their actions. These organizations that come into your town from D.C. and New York City with their big three-ring circus, they come in and they take away animals, they seize animals, and they go away. And then they get on TV and they ask for donations. And it takes money out of your community. It leaves a sense of people feel like they've been violated. The entire community feels like they've been violated when these people come in.
Yeah.
It's terrifying for people that are in the animal industry.
So let me ask you this. we're going to have to wrap it up here, but we got a lot more to talk about, John. But I just want to cover a couple things before we do. If someone from an animal rights organization pulls in my driveway, do they have any legal authority or right? Do I have any obligation to let them come and inspect my property?
There's so many different layers and elements to this animal rights thing. We have, you're talking USDA. USDA has inspectors. If you're a licensed breeder, if you're a licensed individual, licensed for any kind of animal activity through the federal government or through the state or through your county, if your county requires certain licenses, just a simple dog license, but that would fall in a different category, obviously. But there are people that if you are a licensee, they have a right to come and inspect your operation.
Government does.
Government. And these animal rights organizations. But here's the big thing, Chris. Here's the dangerous thing. And why that question to your sheriff is so important. Are your deputies trained by these animal rights people? You need to ask your animal control. If your animal control is not under the umbrella of your sheriff, if they're a separate entity, they need to be asked the same questions. Are you trained by these organizations? Are you funded in any way? Have they given you a grant? I call them bribes. It's not a grant, it's a bribe, because there's strings attached. They expect you to do certain things with that money. Those are the questions that need to be asked. But to get back to your question, you have the right to stop anyone at your driveway, at the edge of your property, and demand that they identify themselves. If you're not comfortable with who that individual is, I don't care who they say they are. If they're not in a uniform, a law enforcement uniform with a badge, and you don't recognize them, stop them, refuse them entry to your property. These people are slick. They're slick.
Yep.
But they're going to do their homework before they come to your place. They're not going to show up. They're going to have done their homework. They're going to have been following you in some way. It's one of the reasons that I'm off of all social media now, is just because that's one of the best things, that's one of their best tools, is social media. The stuff that your houndsmen share on social media is the first thing they'll go look at if they decide to put a target on your back. That's the first thing they're going to look at.
Thank you for validating that. We've still got several houndsmen out there in different groups and pages and different things that will not heed that warning, and they do not understand it. And they say things like, they're going to come and get it anyway. We might as well share what we're doing, or I'm not ashamed of what I do.
Well,
and they act like that they're going to make some last stand at the Alamo because they want to share videos of things on social media. And the problem with that is I'm proud of what I do. I am not ashamed of what I do. I produce a podcast. This thing puts a big target on me and my social media. So I'm not worried about that, but I'm not going to intentionally do things that these animal extremists can take. They can over-sensationalize it, take it out of context, play it at the next National or Natural Resources Commission meeting or my local commissioners meeting to show how I'm a barbarian.
That's it.
And feed the beast.
That's it. And I mentioned Sun Tzu intentionally because there's a quote about, there's several good, obviously, quotes by Sun Tzu. But one of them is fighting from the high ground. And these animal rights extremists own the high ground. They own it right now. Anything we do now is reactive. We have not taken a proactive approach to go after these organizations to stop them. And therefore, we are way behind. We are fighting an uphill battle and with the sun in our eyes from low ground. That's what we're doing. And if these individuals want to post this stuff, okay, look, guys, it's about bottom line is you're an attention whore. Let's just say what it is. You don't care about your fellow houndsmen, And I can say this, some of you may be offended by this statement. Some of the listeners may hate me for making this statement. They're going to say, who the hell is this guy?
We talk about the truth.
Yeah. Who is this guy
to
tell me? But you stop and just do me a favor. Stop and think before you post something and ask yourself, could this impact the entire industry? Could this hurt my neighbors? Could this hurt my friends in the long run? And if it can, then just pull your finger back and don't hit send. Don't share it.
Is this going to benefit my hound hunting community, or is this going to benefit me?
Yeah.
You know,
am I going to get a bunch of likes?
Who is this really for?
Mm-hmm.
Is it for me, or is it for,
And if you really want to be a rebel in your cause and you really want to make a difference, then get your ass into those meetings. Go to the meeting and be that representative that sits there and says, that's a lie. That's a lie. Let me tell you what we really represent. Because if you want to lose credibility, keep posting a bunch of stuff that just feeds that animal rights extremist ideology. You're helping them. You're helping them.
Right.
If you're posting stuff that we all understand.
This is what I've seen, John. I've seen videos that, it's a well laid out video. Okay, it shows the family together, the kids, the ethical pursuit, the harvest of the game. And then the family gathering for, after that. And what happens is the animal rights extremists go and they peel all of the other stuff back. Mm-hmm. They pick and choose. They cherry pick the part that serves their cause. Yep. And now we're showing how these small children are being indoctrinated into the murder of wildlife.
Yep, there you go. And you nailed it.
Takes the context completely out of it.
Let's take that exact scenario into the agriculture world. These people are going into the 4-H fairs. This is their great time right now to collect evidence.
Yeah.
They go into the 4-H fairs and they get photos of these kids selling their livestock in the ring. These kids hugging a cow by the neck and crying. Mm-hmm. And they put it on their social media. They're vegan. And again, I don't care what you eat. If you want to live on crickets and grasshoppers, more power to you. But these people are taking... they're what I call militant vegans. They take photos like that, and you just see them at the fair taking photos. You think it's somebody in
Everybody's
support.
Taking photos.
Yeah,
We've all got a phone. We've all got a camera.
They're sharing this on social media saying, look what these kids are going through. These poor children that are in these 4-H and FFA programs, that they're being taught to murder. They use the word murder. They like to use these anthropomorphism words. That makes an animal turn into a person.
Right.
And they've been doing that since the 70s with cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
with Bambi and stuff like that. This indoctrination started when we were little kids, Chris.
Right.
They want every kid to see an animal as a person. So they let them they make them talk, and they have them do human things, and they drive cars, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole, no pun intended, that we could go down. But they're using our own industries against us to push their narrative.
Yes.
So they're saying that these kids are being taught to murder these animals, and that these kids are going to be mentally disturbed for the rest of their life.
Yep.
And take that, just the agriculture community. Now, see, I'm getting fired up now, because if you take that, and for your listeners, please listen to me. They're doing that in the agriculture community. We all know the process of that cow, that hog, that it gets sold at auction. Some of them may go and live, but most of them are going straight to slaughter.
Right.
And it's going to fill the freezers, and you're going to sit around Sunday, and you're going to have a nice family dinner based on that.
We're going to smoke it in your smoker.
Yeah, that meat ought to be getting pretty good shape about now. These kids are crying because they understand the work that went into that, and the connection of, you can call it love if you want to, but a kid, the endearment, the respect. It's the respect.
It's a mutual respect.
A mutual respect. Of course, if you're spending every day for a year or 6 months with that animal, you get to know that animal's personality, and that animal gets to know you. That animal becomes dependent on you. But then when it reaches the end of its life cycle and its purpose on this planet, that kid is coming out of that situation with a real understanding of where his food comes from, where her food comes from, and the hard work and the pulling of your heartstrings that goes with that. I've never met a farmer in my life that took any kind of pleasure in doing anything that caused injury or pain to an animal. Right. Animal husbandry does cause pain.
Man, this is a whole, I'm telling you.
But here, let me get back, and I don't mean to interrupt you. It's your show, and
you got the message.
I'm monopolizing this whole thing.
I was just going to validate what you said.
Take that. You guys listening to this podcast, take what I just said about the animal agriculture industry and magnify it now, because you're not raising an animal. You're not spending every day raising an animal that's going to go to auction and be slaughtered. You're chasing that animal with a hound for the purpose of harvesting that animal. Mm-hmm. Now, we call it harvesting because that's the politically correct way to say it. That's the nice way to say it. Why do we say that? Why do we say those kind of words?
Because we've been conditioned to say it.
Yeah, we've been conditioned to say it. We're afraid of what the animal rights people may say. But the bottom line is,
we're going to kill it.
We're going to kill it. And if it's depending on what kind of hunt it is, that hound may kill it, or a pack of hounds may kill it. And we've changed our terminology. We've changed our way of communicating because we're afraid of these animal rights people. And by God, we should be. We should be afraid of them. Because
I would say one thing about the killing part. Mm-hmm. The unique thing about hunting with hounds is the vast majority of the time there is no other form of hunting out there mm-hmm. where when you put enough pressure on a black bear to run him up a tree, mm-hmm. you have all the time in the world normally to stand there and evaluate whether that's a specimen that should be taken out of the population. Mm-hmm. Should it be taken for wildlife management purposes? I've seen bears taken because they're at the end of their life cycle, mm-hmm. and hunters have hearts,
you better believe it.
And they see that animal, and it's like, man, I don't want to use my tag on this animal, but it's the right thing to do because mm-hmm. it's suffering. There is no glorious death in nature. Mm-hmm. Everything either starves to death, gets hit on the road, but the little Bambis aren't gathering around Grandpa's bed to see him off, or they die of predation. Mm-hmm. There's no glorious.
Right.
But hunters are connected with that in a way that an animal rights activist never will be. They
have no desire to learn the truth.
They absolutely don't. And I've seen houndsmen wade into ferocious bay-up fights where a small, an animal is caught and putting themselves in danger for both their life of their hounds and also for the well-being of that animal. Mm-hmm. So anybody that tries to tell me that it's all about, hunters care more about wildlife than an animal rights activist. We've dedicated our lives to it. We've dedicated our money to it, time, everything. You can't tell me any different.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yep.
You and I think I mentioned this to you on one of our telephone conversations, but about the same time, it was really exactly the same time I was getting into law enforcement. I was ready to get out and live on my own after high school. And I saw an advertisement in the local newspaper. It said, "Live rent-free for care of foxhounds and horses."
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, man, that sounds cool. I can do that.
Yeah.
And I called the guy, and I went out and met him out in Jefferson Township here in Morgan County. I met the guy. And he said, well, here's the place. He said, you can live here for free. He said, you got to take care of my foxhounds and my horses. You got to feed them and stuff like that. And he said, can you ride? And I said, yeah, I've been riding horses and mules all my life. Mm-hmm. And he said, we ride English. He said, you're probably used to Western. I said, yeah. And, I'm 19 years old. I didn't know
you can do anything.
I didn't know what, yeah. And I was getting into law enforcement. So, there's that, bravado. But I didn't know the difference. But anyway, my point, that guy he had that fox hunt for 10 years. And he ended up winning all kinds of awards in Pennsylvania and Maryland for his hounds in the hound shows.
Yeah.
There's nothing more thrilling to me. There's no more of an adrenaline rush, even in high-speed pursuits, even when you're getting ready to kick down a door and get that fugitive.
Yeah.
The adrenaline rush that came from riding a thoroughbred horse through the woods, the hills and hollers of Morgan County, Indiana, chasing 50 foxhounds through the woods.
Yeah.
And they're on the trail of a fox. I mean, that's a thrill. That's a thrill. And his hounds, he had a hound from, some of your listeners, I'm sure, would recognize some of these. But a lot of his hounds ended up being what was called a Penn Meridell breed. Mm-hmm. It was a breed that was Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware, Penn Meridells. And they were a big black and tan foxhound. But he had gone to Scotland and got a couple of dogs, a couple of studs there. They were Scartine. They were called Scartine foxhounds, and they looked like a bloodhound. They were massive.
Yeah.
And he bred those into his Penn Meridells. And by the time he had run that 10-year course of that fox, and the only reason he closed it up really was because he had some health issues, but he had really established a name for himself.
Yeah.
In the fox hunting community. But of course that was a different, you're talking about the red coats and the horns, and you're riding
right.
like in England, Scotland, you're riding. And at first, when I first saw that host setup, when they had their first hunt, and I was a young kid there, country boy, seeing that, it was laughable to me. This looks goofy.
Yeah.
These guys in these red coats and blowing these horns, and it was goofy. Yeah. I just thought it was the strangest thing. And I swore I'd never put on those tight riding pants. And, man, I did.
Yeah.
He told me, he said it's like a football uniform. He said you wouldn't go play football without putting on the uniform. He said this is the uniform, and there's reasons why we dress this way and what we do. And I'll tell you, as goofy as it looks, some of those guys could ride a horse, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you're chasing that many hounds and hearing that deep beller, that of those foxhounds magnified by 50 or 60 in a pack,
right,
flowing like one creature, one unit.
Mm-hmm.
That strike hound out front, I mean, that was his baby, that strike hound.
Yeah.
That was the guy you could trust. He would never run a deer.
Right.
Supposedly would never run a deer.
That's what they all say.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to add that little bit here at the end of this because that was a really important time to me. And I was the kennelsman for almost 10 years. I tended all those hounds. He'll claim today, if you talk to him, that the owner, he'll claim I didn't do a very good job picking up the shit out of the yard. I kind of skimmed over that, but
hit it with a mower, scatter it. That's what I do. Well, John, man, I'll tell you what, this has been a great conversation, and I definitely want to do some more. We just scratched the surface.
We did.
I think we can.
We did.
I think you have so much to share for our audience because there's a lot of assumptions out there about what the animal rights movement is and how they operate. But I think you offer a level of experience to help people be prepared, much like, your physical tactics, your ground fighting, training other law enforcement officers. This needs to be building block stuff where people are protected. It's like teaching a self-defense class, only we can build on this. I think it's going to be great. And I can't believe you only live 2 hours from me.
I can't either. You never know.
Yeah. When
you called me, I thought, because you said you got my information from Chip, I just assumed you were out in Pennsylvania somewhere. But yeah, it's always great. And like you said, I mean, we could go anywhere in our conversation because we do have so much in common.
Right. Right. And I know we've ran into each other.
I'm sure.
Either at the academy, because I was
Yeah.
an instructor at the academy, and just different trainings and things you go through, read interrogation schools, and
Yep.
I mean everything. So,
I'm sure we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. You conservation officers were always kind of an elite group, set above everybody else, though.
Did we give you that impression?
Oh yeah, you bunch of arrogant guys. Yeah, every right to be. No, like I told you, Dave Reese was kind of like a mentor to me. He was the guy, man. He was a conservation officer here from Morgan County when I started as a young deputy, and what a great guy, smart. I always felt like Dave was so much more intelligent than the rest of us cops.
You always thought he was.
Well, yeah, could be.
Dave was sharp. There's no doubt about it. Dave
Yeah.
was one of the guys. Same with me. I always paid attention to what Dave had to say and how he conducted himself and approached problems.
And that also goes back to the way we were raised, too, to respect our elders, to respect those that have been there and done that until they do something to lose that respect. But otherwise, yeah.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what. I think we'll just wrap this segment up,
All
and
right.
After we're off the podcast here, we'll start talk. After I push the stop button, we'll talk about our plan for the future.
All right. Sounds good.
We close them out at the same way every time, and you're going to have to go way back to those fox hunting days and following those big. What were they called? Penn Mardells?
Penn Maridel.
Yep.
It's Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware.
Yeah.
It was a breed that was established out there.
Well, we have a saying at the end of these. And it's, you follow your hounds, and I'll follow mine.
There you go.